The dirt road stretched before me like a faded ribbon of tan and gold, winding between low hills and sagebrush that seemed to shimmer under the morning sun. I'd been driving for hours, the windows down, dust swirling through the cab of my old Ford, and when I crested that last hill, I finally saw it, the ranch I'd been dreaming of for years. The place wasn't fancy, not even close, but it was mine. 40 acres of history, solitude, and sky. A 150-year-old ranch house stood near the center, its paint peeling and porch sagging, but it had good bones, strong timber, deep roots, and a story in every creek. I parked by the gate, the hinges moaning like they hadn't been moved in decades. When I stepped out, the scent of dry grass, earth, and faint pine hit me. It smelled like freedom. After 20 years of city noise, HOA fees, and neighbors complaining about everything from lawn height to mailbox color, this was exactly the kind of peace I needed. Across the fence line, though, peace had a different meaning. The neighboring development, Maple Creek Estates, was everything this ranch wasn't. Rows of pastel houses with identical shutters and driveways gleamed in the distance, all perfectly lined up like soldiers. There were rules there, 1,000 of them, no doubt covering everything from acceptable garden gnome sizes to what time you could set out your trash. A giant white sign by their gate read, Maple Creek Estates, a deed-restricted community, no trespassing. I couldn't help but laugh. My land had stood here since the late 1800s, back when the town was just a scattering of miners' shacks and cattle trails. The old boundary stones still marked the edges, sun, bleached, solid, and ignored by modern eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought freedom next to a place that sold conformity. I started unloading my truck, pulling out boxes, a few tools, and my loyal old dog, Rusty, who immediately trotted off to sniff every inch of his new kingdom. I just started checking the fence when I heard a voice, sharp, clipped, and echoing across the dry air. "Excuse me," I turned. A woman in spotless yoga pants and an HOA-issued polo was Power, walking down the gravel path toward me, clipboard in hand. Even from 50 feet away, I could sense the energy radiating off her, that mix of authority and indignation that only a true HOA president could wield. She stopped a few feet from my gate, her hands planted on her hips. "You can't park there," she said without even introducing herself. "This is community access property. Our homeowners use this trail." I looked around at the dusty 2-track lane leading to my house. "Ma'am," I said, "this road's been part of the ranch since before your subdivision was even an idea on a zoning map." Her eyebrows rose. "That's impossible. The HOA owns everything from the main road to the creek. This is clearly within our easement." I reached into the glove box of my truck and pulled out a folded survey map, old, yellowed, but stamped by the county. "See this marker?" I pointed to the iron post sticking out of the dirt by her feet. "This line here's been the boundary since 1874. That's county record, not HOA policy." She frowned at the paper but didn't come closer. "Well," she said after a moment, "you'll need to talk to the association about proper landscaping. That old fence is an eyesore, and we have aesthetic standards." I almost laughed, thinking she must be joking. "Lady, this fence has stood longer than your entire neighborhood. It's not ugly, it's historic." That clearly wasn't the right answer. Her face tightened like she'd bitten into a lemon. "We'll see what the board says. I'll be filing a notice about this. Oh, and your dog needs to be leashed. We can't have animals running loose. It upsets the community pets." I looked over at Rusty, who was lying in the shade chewing a stick, miles away from anything resembling the community. "He's fine," I said. "He's on my land." She crossed her arms. "That remains to be determined." I tilted my hat back and studied her. "You really think this ranch is part of your subdivision?" She nodded crisply. "Everything visible from our main road falls under the aesthetic zone. If it impacts our property values, it's community property. It's in our charter." I whistled low. "That's one fancy way of saying you don't like your view." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll be in touch," she said, and then turned sharply on her heel. dust puffing around her sneakers as she stomped back toward the neatly trimmed lawns of Maple Creek. Rusty looked up at me as she disappeared down the hill, tail thumping lazily. "Well, buddy," I said, patting his head, "looks like we've met the local welcoming committee." He barked once, low and amused. I spent the rest of the afternoon fixing up the porch, nailing down loose boards, and sipping cold water from the cooler. Every so often, I'd see her again in the distance, Karen, that's what her name tag had said, standing near the boundary fence with her phone, taking pictures. At one point, 2 other people joined her, probably her fellow board members, pointing toward my property like they were inspecting an alien invasion. As the sun began to dip, the horizon turned molten orange. I leaned against the fence, taking it all in the endless stretch of pasture, the rusted windmill creaking gently, the shadows of the cottonwoods stretching long and soft. I could hear faint laughter and music drifting from the subdivision, the kind that comes from backyard barbecues where everyone pretends to like each other because the rules say they have to. I preferred the silence, the honest kind. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with a lantern flickering beside me, a car crept up the dirt road, sleek, white, and completely out of place out here. It slowed to a stop right by the fence. The headlights caught me full in the face before flicking off. Karen stepped out, holding a clipboard and a small flashlight, just so you know. She called out, "We're filing a petition to review the property boundaries. Our developer believes your fence line encroaches on HOA territory." I set my drink down and stood. "You do that," I said calmly, "but you might want to check the county records first, because if you step foot past that line again without permission, you'll be the one trespassing." She stared at me for a long moment, her flashlight beam trembling slightly. Then she huffed, climbed back into her car, and sped off toward her neatly paved world. Rusty let out a low growl as the taillights vanished. I scratched his ears. "Don't worry," I told him. "She'll be back. People like that always are." The wind picked up, rustling through the dry grass and rattling the tin roof. Somewhere out in the pasture, a coyote called. The stars burned bright and hard above me, the way they only can when you're far from streetlights and nonsense rules. I leaned back in my old rocking chair, feeling the wood groan beneath me. This place had survived droughts, blizzards, and probably a few feuds. It would survive one more, even if the enemy this time wore yoga pants and wielded an HOA charter instead of a 6-shooter. I smiled to myself, knowing I'd bought more than just a ranch. I'd bought a front row seat to chaos, and I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The knock on the door came just after sunrise, sharp and insistent, not the kind of knock that waits politely to be answered, but the kind that demands obedience. Rusty barked once, low and suspicious, his tail stiff. I wiped the sleep from my eyes and pulled on a shirt before heading for the door, already knowing who it was. When I opened it, there she stood, Karen, flanked by 2 others, a man in khakis and a woman in a crisp blazer, both holding matching clipboards. They looked like a parody of authority, standing on my worn wooden porch under the hand-painted sign that said "Welcome to the Ranch." The morning sun threw long shadows behind them, and their SUV, gleaming white, HOA logo on the side, was parked halfway across my fence line. "Good morning," Karen said, her voice clipped and official. "You are currently in violation of several community ordinances. We've come to deliver your eviction notice." I blinked at her, still half asleep. My what now? She thrust a thick packet of paper into my hands. "Your eviction. As of last night's emergency board meeting, this property has been annexed into Maple Creek Estates. You are now under the governance of the Homeowners Association. Unfortunately, your structures and activities are not in compliance with community standards, so you'll need to vacate within 72 hours. I stared at her, then at the paper, then back at her. "You can't be serious." The man beside her cleared his throat, clearly trying to sound important. "This decision was voted on unanimously," he said. "We've already filed the necessary paperwork with the association's attorney." I couldn't help but laugh. It came out louder than I meant it to. "Ma'am, this ranch has been on county record since before your grandparents were born. You can't just vote to take it. Karen's mouth twisted. The community has a right to protect its environment and property values. This land affects our neighborhood's appearance, and our charter allows us to manage adjoining properties if they impact the community aesthetic. Community aesthetic, I echoed. You mean my grass isn't short enough for your liking? She ignored the sarcasm. Your barn is an eyesore, and the livestock, she glanced distastefully at the chickens pecking by the fence, are not permitted under Maple Creek regulations. That's because this isn't Maple Creek, I said evenly. This is Miller Ranch, private property, county jurisdiction. You folks have no authority here. The woman in the blazer stepped forward, clipboard held like a weapon. Sir, hostility isn't necessary. If you cooperate, we can help you relocate. The HOA has several guidelines for transitional residents. That did it. I laughed again, full and loud, until even Rusty looked at me funny. Transitional residents, I said. Lady, I'm not going anywhere. You're the ones trespassing. Karen's cheeks flushed red. We'll see about that. Our legal team is already preparing the paperwork. You'll be hearing from them soon. Good, I said, folding the eviction notice and tucking it into my pocket. Make sure they bring a copy of the county plat map when they do. At that exact moment, tires crunched on gravel behind them. A county sheriff's cruiser rolled up the road, sunlight glinting off its hood. The blue lights weren't on, but the presence alone changed everything. The man in khakis stiffened. You called the sheriff? I smiled. I figured I might need a witness. Karen's been a little too interested in my property lines lately. The deputy climbed out, tall, middle-aged, wearing mirrored sunglasses, and the kind of calm that only comes from dealing with nonsense on a daily basis. Morning, folks, he said. Got a call about a trespassing dispute. Karen straightened, trying to take control again. Yes, officer, we're from the Maple Creek Homeowner Association. This man has illegally occupied community property. We're serving him with notice. The deputy looked at her, then at me, then down at the fence line. Community property. He repeated slowly. This here's Miller Ranch. Boundary's been the same since before the subdivision went in. County survey confirmed it just last month. Karen blinked. That's not possible. Our maps, your maps. The deputy interrupted. Don't override county records. He turned his gaze on her, calm but firm. You and your board have been warned before about harassing property owners. This is private land. You're trespassing. The man in khaki stepped in. Officer, perhaps you don't understand the full situation. I understand perfectly. The deputy said, cutting him off. You all have no authority here. If you keep showing up, you'll be cited for harassment. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her indignation practically vibrating in the air. But our community values. This affects the neighborhood reputation. The deputy tipped his hat, then don't look at it. The silence that followed was heavy, even the wind seemed to pause. Karen's face flushed deep red, her hands gripping the clipboard until the papers crumpled. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stalked toward her SUV. The others followed, muttering under their breath. As they climbed in, the deputy leaned toward me and said quietly, You weren't kidding. That woman's been calling our office for weeks, trying to get this place condemned. Said your barn was a health hazard, and your windmill was unsightly. I shook my head. Figures. She's obsessed with rules she didn't write. He chuckled. Welcome to the neighborhood, I guess. You need anything, call me. But don't lose your cool. Folks like that thrive on a fight. Appreciate it, I said, and watched as his cruiser rolled away down the road, the dust trailing behind like a ribbon. When the last sound faded, I turned back. Toward the porch, Rusty had stretched out in the shade again, completely unbothered, tail wagging lazily. I knelt to scratch his ears. Well, partner, I said, guess we made an impression. He licked my hand and gave a small, satisfied huff. For the rest of the morning, I worked on fixing the fence they'd tried to inspect the week before. Someone, and I didn't have to guess who, had loosened a few boards and pulled one of the boundary markers out of the ground. It was childish, but it told me something important. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. Around noon, as I was tightening the last wire, I heard the faint hum of an electric mower from across the field. I looked up to see Karen's husband, or maybe one of her HOA volunteers, trimming the edge of the manicured lawn right up against my fence, glaring at me the entire time like I'd personally insulted his mulch. I raised my hand in a friendly wave. He didn't wave back. That night, when the sun sank low and the crickets started their song, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, the eviction notice spread out in front of me. It was printed on fancy paper, all official looking, but the more I read, the funnier it got. They'd written it like a government decree by order of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. This property shall be vacated in 72 hours to maintain the integrity and visual harmony of the community. Visual harmony. I chuckled out loud. I picked up a pen and scrawled a note across the top of the page. Return to sender, not my circus, not my HOA. I tacked it to the fence post the next morning, right where their road met my property line. Let them see it every time they passed by. The air was warm, the sky impossibly wide, and as the wind rustled through the fields, I could feel the ranch settling back into itself, calm, sturdy, unbothered. It had weathered more than this before. I leaned on the fence, watching the sunlight creep across the pasture, and smiled. Let Karen bring her lawyers, her rules, her meetings. This land had its own laws, written in dust, rain, and time. And me, I wasn't going anywhere. Would you like me to write a scene 1,000 words where Karen escalates her fight with a lawsuit or sabotage, and the rancher finds a clever, satisfying way to turn the tables?